There is a town in Missouri that you can visit. You just need a boat, 100 feet of water above your head, and a reason good enough to go down there. Its name was Oasis. It sat in the White River Valley in Stone County. People were born there, married there, buried there, and in 1959 the water came up over it and did not go back down. Divers go now, technical divers, with the right gas mixtures and the right training, because 100 feet in cold, dark, fresh water is not a thing you do casually. And what they report is that the architecture is still down there, preserved, standing in the dark, in the silence where a street used to be. That is number 2 on this list. I want to be clear from the start about what this video is, because there is a version of this subject that gets told as a ghost story, and that is not what happened here. Nothing about these towns was mysterious. Nobody vanished. Every one of them was drowned deliberately on a published schedule by decision of the federal government and the power companies, and the people who lived in them were told in advance and moved out. That is what makes it worth talking about, not that it was strange, but that it was completely ordinary and it happened over and over across these hills, within living memory. Number 6, start with the one that set the pattern because it is the oldest and the biggest. On the 2nd of February 1931, the gates closed on the Osage River and the valley behind them began to fill. What it made is the Lake of the Ozarks, 86 square miles of water, around 58,500 acres spread across 4 counties. Understand what filling a valley that size actually involves. It is not simply a matter of letting water in. Roughly 1 million cubic yards of earth and rock had to be moved. Homes had to go. Churches, businesses, roads, and cemeteries, which is the part that stops people when they hear it, because a cemetery does not move itself. The Osage Valley was farmed bottomland. It was the good ground. That is the recurring cruelty of every story on this list. And it is worth saying now, rather than at the end. When you flood a river valley in hill country, you do not drown the poor rocky ridge land. You drown the best soil anybody had because the best soil is always in the bottom, and the bottom is what fills. The people who lost the most were the people who had the most worth losing. Number 5. Move south and forward 16 years to the White River on the Missouri and Arkansas line. Work on Bull Shoals Dam began in 1947 and finished in 1951, and it was dedicated in 1952 by President Harry Truman in person. That project required the relocation of 27 cemeteries. 7 of them were small family plots, the kind with a fence around 6 stones on a rise behind where a house used to be. 20 were larger. Over 3,000 sets of remains were exhumed and reinterred above the waterline. 3,000. Dug up, moved, and put back down somewhere else by contract, on a schedule, because the alternative was leaving them where they were and letting the lake close over them. Some families were there for it. Some were not, because some of those graves were a century old by then, and there was nobody left who knew the name. And I want to slow down on what that work actually was, because the phrase cemetery relocation makes it sound administrative. A hill cemetery in the Ozarks in the 1940s was not a lawn with a fence and a register. It was a rise behind a church or above a home place, in ground that had been used for burials since before the Civil War. Many of the markers were fieldstone, uncarved, placed by somebody who knew who was under it and told their children, and the children told theirs. And by 1948, the last person who knew had been dead 30 years. So crews went in with the records that existed, which were often a church book, a family Bible, or an old man's memory. They located what they could. They dug. What comes out of ground that has held a burial for 80 or 100 years in acidic Ozarks soil is frequently very little. Some remains, coffin hardware, a stain in the earth in the shape of a box. All of it went into a new container, went up the hill, and went back into ground the water would not reach. Now think about the ones they did not find. Unmarked graves. Family plots nobody reported because the family had moved to Oklahoma in 1935 and nobody left in the county knew there was. Anybody buried on that rise. Enslaved people's burials, which were very rarely marked and almost never recorded anywhere, a 1948 survey crew would look. Infants, the 1918 flu. Those are still down there. That is the part of the flooded Ozarks that does not get said clearly. It is not only towns under the water. In every one of these reservoirs, there are people under the water. And nobody knows how many because the record of where they were was never written down in the first place. Number 4. In the same project, at the same time, one town decided not to accept the choice it had been given. Forsyth, Missouri learned in the late 1940s that it was going under. Most towns in this position simply ended. People sold, took the money, and scattered to wherever there was work. The town stopped existing, and after a decade, there was nothing but a name on an old map and a road that ran into the water. Forsyth refused that. A member of the city council named Douglas Monkey led an effort to move the town rather than lose it. And across 1950 and 1951, they took the buildings up the hill. Homes and structures were physically relocated from what people still call Old Forsyth up onto the bluffs overlooking the river. So there is a new Forsyth, and it is up there now, and it is made partly out of the old one. I find that the most human thing in this entire subject. Everybody in that valley was handed the same situation. One town, through what appears to be the stubbornness of a handful of people, refused to let the answer be an ending. Number 3, Ragtown, Missouri, went under Table Rock in 1959. I am including it partly because of the name, which tells you what kind of place it was before anybody wrote its history. Nobody calls a settlement Ragtown out of affection for the architecture. These were small, White River Valley communities. Not county seats, not places with a courthouse or a newspaper, or anybody employed to keep records, which means that when a place like this goes underwater, the documentary trace it leaves behind is thin to the point of nothing, and what is actually lost is not buildings. It is the only copy of a great deal of ordinary information. Who lived where? Which families were connected to which? What the ground was called before it was under a lake. Number 2, Oasis, Missouri, the one I opened with. Table Rock, 1959. It sits about 100 feet down. And here is the part that makes Oasis different from every other place on this list. Most drowned towns were cleared before flooding. Structures burned or knocked down, salvage taken, the site left bare so it would not become a navigation hazard. Oasis was not fully erased. Enough structure survived that divers who go down there find recognizable, built architecture standing in the dark. Think about what that means physically. There is a place in Missouri, right now, today, where a building is standing upright in total darkness at the bottom of a lake, and has been for over 65 years, and will keep standing until the concrete finally gives. People water ski over it in July. Number 1, and number 1 is not a town. It is the pattern all 6 of these belong to, and it is the reason this is a hard truth untold video rather than a travel listicle. Every reservoir on this list was built for reasons that were stated publicly and were largely true. Flood control on rivers that genuinely did drown people. Hydroelectric power for a region that in the 1930s and 1940s largely did not have electricity, later, recreation, and the economy that came with it. Those were real benefits, and a great many people in these hills got real electricity and real protection from real floods out of them. But notice one more time who paid and who collected. The people who lost their farms, their houses, their churches, and their family graves were the people who lived in the bottoms of Ozark River valleys. Rural, not wealthy, not politically organized, not in a position to hire a lawyer against the federal government or a utility company. The power went to cities. The flood protection largely benefited downstream interests. The recreation economy that grew on the shoreline afterward was built and owned in very large part by people who arrived later with money. And the waterfront land those lakes created became some of the most valuable property in the state. The valley families were bought out at pre-lake prices for farmland. The lakefront that replaced it sells for something else entirely, and it does not sell to them. So the last thing under that water is not a building. It is a transfer. Somebody's bottomland became somebody else's shoreline, and the ledger was settled at agricultural rates before the water arrived. That is the pattern, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it around any lake in this region. And every so often, the lakes give a piece of it back. In a hard drought, when the reservoirs draw down further than usual, things start appearing along the shoreline that are not supposed to be there. Foundation lines, squared-off stone, a road surface running down the bank and continuing under the water at the same grade. Bridge abutments standing in the open, with nothing to carry. People find them, photograph them, and post them. And every time it happens, somebody in the comments says the lake is haunted, or the town is coming back. It is not coming back. It never went anywhere. It has been sitting there the entire time at a fixed elevation, and all that changed is that the water dropped below it for a season. Which is, if you think about it, exactly what this channel is about. The thing was never hidden. It was just under something, and most people only look when the level falls. If your family was moved for one of these, and there are still a great many people in Missouri and Arkansas who were or whose parents were, tell me which lake and which town in the comments. That history is almost entirely unwritten. It exists in people's memory and it is going. And this is one of the few places anybody is collecting it.